Well, hello, everybody. My name is Louis Delaware. I'm with the Living in Place Institute, and I'm really thrilled to be moderating this outstanding session with some local Colorado and California-based architects, along with a gentleman who's an expert in regards to fire prevention and what you need to do to around your home to be able to make it so that it's much better in regards to fire resistance. So first off, I'm going to start with Mr. John Danielian. John is with Danielian Associates in California. There have been, obviously, being in California, they've been involved with many other fires along the way. And actually, a little bit of personal reference here, his company is actually designing our house in Louisville that was involved in the Marshall wildfire as well. They have been around 54 years. They've really an accomplished architecture firm. They've had over 750 awards. They do indeed practice in 44 states and 15 countries around the world. So John, welcome here today.
Thank you, Louis.
And then Travis Hendricks, he's also an architect with KGA Studios here, I believe in Denver. Am I correct with that?
Yep.
And they recently moved from Boulder. They practice in 8 states, including many fire states that have risks of fire. And from the Marshall wildfire, they're involved in at least 15 homes. And then I also have Robbie Schwartz. He's with Build Tank in Boulder. They're basically a practical building consulting sort of company or organization. And Robbie is also the point person, if you will, for the Boulder County for the Marshall wildfire as a building advisor for there. So welcome, Robbie.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So let's get started here. All right. John, what materials are you recommending to prevent or minimize fires on the outside of a home?
Well, there are only a few materials that are actually 100%. And I mean, there's really no such thing as 100%, but the closest thing would be, brick, concrete, and you've got some stones that can help protect a home. But there are other materials which is not widely used in Colorado, and that's stucco. We use a lot of it here in California. You can get a 1-hour protection. A lot of EIFS is being used in Colorado, and that's unfortunately not it's not a fire protected material. There's other materials you can look at if you want to get into wood siding. You go with some type of cementatious product like a hardy board. There's other products, many products out there actually. So you could start looking at some of those type of products to help with the fire protection of your home.
So you mentioned something that I'm not familiar with. That's EIFS. What is that?
Well, I mean, the EIFS is actually an applied material, and I mean, Travis, you guys use plenty of it in Colorado, and he could probably talk about the process of that probably better than I can. But it's a layered material, but Travis, why don't you give a little bit more information on that?
Yeah. So EIFS, I mean, it's not something that's had a different range of reputation in Colorado. It's kind of was popular and then unpopular and popular again. But it's essentially a foam with a pre-applied stucco coating on it. So it provides like an insulative level of barrier on the exterior side of the wall. Again, it's not great for fire because it's foam, it's just going to melt. And it also, you have issues with it long-term from moisture, and mold can grow in it. And then there was also some issues with woodpeckers really like to perch on it and blow holes into it. So from a homeowner's perspective, it's not something we would recommend just from a life cycle use of the material, but it is something that historically did occur all over the Marshall fire burn area on a variety of buildings, and something probably to stay away from to use in the future.
So Robbie, I hear about the whole concept of having a conditioned attic. Can you elaborate on what that actually means?
Yeah, so I think we're transitioning maybe quickly from materials to more of an assembly, looking at the house as a whole unit and also the assemblies. that are going with the house, and means to prevent that house potentially from catching on fire. And a conditioned attic is one of those things. So basically, you are not ventilating the attic, and generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, you're moving the building thermal envelope from the flat plane of the insulated attic space with ventilation space above it to the roof deck. Often it's done with a closed cell foam, and you're installing that closed cell foam directly against the roof deck, and you're not ventilating that space. You're basically treating that space as a conditioned space, although not conditioned in this at the same level as the habitable space, but you do have to run some conditioned air through that space so that it doesn't get elevated moisture levels and other things that might happen there. Now, the benefit of that, not having the ventilation, attic ventilation there, is that you don't have the potential of embers entering that attic and in essence catching that house on fire from the inside out. And that's really one of the big things that happened specifically in the Marshall Fire area, is that the high winds created a negative pressure inside that attic that actually sucked embers into the house, catching that house on fire. Then that house, the embers jumped from one house to the other house to the other house because of the severe winds that we saw.
So how warm does that attic typically get here in Colorado, where we sometimes get 100-degree days? I mean, I know I've been up in my attic in the
Well,
middle of summer, and boy, I tell you, it's like a sauna up there. And
Yeah,
I try to get in and out of there as fast as I can.
in a ventilated attic space, that space will get up into well into the 160 range on a summer day, especially if you have dark shingle cover or roof cladding systems. If you have dark colors on there, it's going to get hotter and hotter there, even with the ventilated space. It's awfully hot.
There's a couple other benefits too. When you've got a conditioned attic, a lot of times you'll have your ductwork running through your attic space. So it's been shown that a lot of your ductwork, your air conditioning and such, runs a lot more efficiently because it's in a conditioned attic. So there are other benefits. There is sometimes there's a cost. Conditioned attics can cost a little bit more, but I think the benefits outweigh it. As Robbie said, I mean, whenever you can minimize any penetration in a roof, it's going to be great for fire protection. But there's also benefits too. A lot of times we're putting solar on roofs, and it also eliminates some of those obstacles on the roof. So you really need to balance it. It's a little bit more expensive, but I think down the road for fire protection, energy efficiency, and just having the flexibility for anything that you put on a roof like a solar panel, the benefits outweigh the cost.
So Travis and John, are almost all the homes you're doing now in fire zones a conditioned attic?
The very vast majority. I think we had one house where the client specifically asked not to. But other than that, it's something, honestly, we've been doing in practice, especially on the custom home side of our firm for years. It's just a higher performing roof system. And in order to accommodate some of the costs of it, we've gone to more of like a flash and bat system where we only spray 3 inches of closed cell spray foam just to make sure that the dew point's maintained, and then they back that with bat blankets, whether that's fiberglass or mineral wool. And that helps alleviate some of the cost differential. But big picture, having your thermal envelope on the whole home, it's continuous and exceptionally tight. It just produces a better result overall. And in our minds, it's always better to look at that cost and see if that can be afforded in a build, first and foremost.
Yeah.
So
So
shifting back to a little bit more material wise.
can I
what's your
stop?
rec-
Real,
Go ahead,
sorry,
Robbie.
I just
Go
wanted
ahead.
to interject, and sorry to stop you there, but there was an event that happened for Marshall Fires. People who went through the Marshall Fire to learn about different construction techniques, and there was a really interesting vendor there called Vulcan Vent, And they created this venting system where when it's exposed to heat, it basically melts and closes off the vent. So in essence, you can have a ventilated attic space that is also more fire resilient. And I thought that was really interesting, and it's the first time I had ever seen it. So I wanted to just throw that out here quickly. I don't know if maybe the architects have seen that before and have used it, if you have any experience with it.
I'm very familiar with that product. We have not used it actually. We actually did this presentation back in September live, and I think we brought that material up as well. But I think that's a great viable option as well.
Are there also vents that have like stainless steel screen or mesh or wool, if you will, that can do the same thing?
Maybe, but I'm not aware of one that's specifically marketing for that purpose.
There are, I mean, a lot of the roof vents do have like a really small mesh in it to help prevent that. But I think for a major fire, it's not going to stop it. It might stop a few embers flying around, but for a wildfire like you experienced in Louisville, it wouldn't have helped.
Yeah, you would have really needed the one with the intumescent substrate in there that expands and kind of closes it all up or melts it shut.
But then you'd have to replace those afterwards because they, more or less they're solid at that point in time. Am I correct?
Yes, yeah. So I think you would, the house, if the house didn't burn, there would still potentially be fire damage, smoke damage, and other things that would have to be repaired, but you wouldn't have to replace the entirety of the house.
And so what do you guys typically do for like soffits and behind gutters? Because those in many cases are just straight wood.
I mean, obviously, if you've got a gutter system, you always want to keep your gutters clean. There's a lot of debris. Certainly, if you're near trees, you get a lot of debris in there. That does create fuel for fire. So, they do have a screening device. You probably see it on commercials all the time, but they do have a screen that goes over the gutter. That's effective. That's one option. But going to the eaves, here in California, when we're in a fire zone, we'll wrap our eaves with stucco. A lot of times, you'll see a typical eave where the underbelly will be exposed wood, which again becomes just a wick to the home. So by having a closed eave where you wrap the stucco back, you really start closing up that space. And a lot of fires actually, they start in the eaves and they crawl into the attic, and once it gets in the attic, there's no way of stopping it. So that's one of your most vulnerable spots on a home.
So what does somebody do if they're using, say, brick or like something like hardy board? Do they bring that out to the eave as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can do that.
Hardy provides cementitious soffit panels and fascia. And I think that's probably the most common practice in Colorado to date. And we just don't have the same prolific amount of stucco use that you'll see in regions like California or the Southwest in general.
That's right.
All right, now shifting to the actual roof material, what are you guys recommending for that sort of, whether it's asphalt or tile or other materials for roofs?
So we're still in this common thread of looking for materials that are ignition resistant. So the ignition resistant materials on roofs, most of the foolproof ones are going to be rather expensive. You can put stone on your roof, you can have a slate roof, but that's not something your average homeowner can afford. So what most people would be looking for is a roof that is Class A rated, which provides the highest fire rated assembly. You can still get that in asphalt shingle. Obviously, it's going to not be 100% ignition resistant, but that gets you to that threshold. And then if you can afford something to go even more premium, then you're looking at options like ceramic tile or clay tile, slate, or other options. And, you know, I think Tesla roofs or some of those solar roof shingle companies are just made out of glass, and they have an inherent resistance in them as well. So that would be the other kind of premium high performance roof you could go to.
What's your take in regards to, especially Travis, because you live here, of a stone coated steel roof? In regards to, obviously it's gonna be fire resistant, but what's it like in regards to hail damage?
You know, it's so variable in Colorado. A steel roof can get damaged in a hailstorm, just like an asphalt shingle roof can. You could get some pockmarks or dimples, but at the same time, I've seen metal roofs last in the Front Range in Denver for 40+ years and still look really good. So it's just a little bit of a balance, and you never know if you're going to get underneath one of those hailstorms that has golf ball size hail. The insurance level of it, I think, is variable, but it can still be patched and repaired like an asphalt roof, and it would be seamed back together. So it's definitely plausible. And I think what most people end up evaluating when they look at those options is steel roofs are about twice the cost of asphalt shingles. So it usually becomes a cost issue again.
All right, so Robbie, what's your take in regards to like patio materials? I mean, a lot of people, I mean, I had my old home that burnt down. It had redwood out front, and then it had a composite sort of material out back. What's your recommendation for what people should be doing in regards to that? Because obviously wood is a definite, you know, matchstick, if you will. And I don't know much about the composite materials like Trex and the like.
Yeah, for decks and patios, and also wood fences, it's a big issue. I mean, the biggest thing is probably not to have a wood deck, or move fencing farther away from the structure if you're really concerned with that. You know, composite decking materials pretty much going to melt versus probably catch on fire itself. So that maybe could be a potentially better choice material there. If you can have a step down to a patio that's basically ground level, where you could have a stone patio or something, that would be a better choice. So you're really kind of getting into aesthetics, but also evaluation of risk and what you want to do with that. But in essence, the whole notion of kind of being wildfire prepared is creating a defensible space around the house, and that becomes more difficult in suburban communities where the density is pretty high, and you have 5-foot separation between houses and a wooden cedar fence between them. That fence potentially is a detriment to the homes.
So, you know, okay, let's talk about outside the house, the defensible perimeter, if you will. What's the minimum, Robbie, you like to see, and John also, in regards to, like, okay, where does the fence, the wood material on the fence end? You know, because sometimes people like us, it's pretty expensive putting in other materials all the way around the property, because I probably have, I'm going to guess on the order of about 250 lineal feet of fencing. And obviously perhaps the cheapest way to go is cedar fencing, but I get that. I don't want that to come to my house, because it's kiln dried, if you will, after about 5 years.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great question, and I'm not sure actually if there are actual programs out there that can help guide you to be wildfire prepared. The Insurance Institute, for example, has a program called Wildfire Prepared Homes. And I think that they are recommending at least 5 feet away from the house, and that would kind of follow the idea of having stone and positive drainage away from the house, so and not grass or shrubs or other things that could catch fire planted right against the foundation and the house. So there are a variety of reasons beyond fire that you want that as well, from a moisture interaction with your foundation system. But I think that minimum 5 feet rule is probably a good recommendation.
And does that also include, not that people who are rebuilding will have tall trees, but how close, should the tree overhang be to the house as well?
The farther, the better.
Yeah, I mean, that 5 foot is for combustibles in general. So that would be tree branches and large shrubs. And you could do ornamental grasses that you cut short or have the ability to cut short so that you reduce the risk. But that 5 foot precedent is pretty hard line against anything that could light on fire. So that also provides that issue with having a wood deck attached to the house, right?
So, another option too is you could do some type of pavered deck, it being like a tile. So there are other things that look nice other than a deck that you might want to, if you have to have a deck, you can extend your tile. Maybe you've got some tile inside your home and expands outside, and it's kind of the same material. So you have that seamless transition, yet it's still fire protected in a fire. But going back to the walls and fences, I know it's not always it's costly, but going to a block wall is always, especially at least within that 5 feet. Robbie talks about the being 5 feet away. Maybe at the gate portion, you've got block on either side of a fence or a gate, and maybe that gate is metal. Maybe it's some type of non-combustible material, not wood. So that's something. And then going back to the defensible space, really any shrubs less than 18 inches high should be placed near your home. And one thing that people need to understand too is whenever you put bark or any type of mulch material in your planter beds, that is fuel. So, a lot of times they recommend going with rock. You can just go regular soil. But those are just a few things to keep in mind in that 5 foot zone. They've got different zones. They've got, they got a 10-foot zone, and then what goes anything beyond that. And so you talk about trees, your tree should be, at least 20 feet away from the home, a large tree, I should say.
Yeah. And we should remember that the Marshall Fire in particular wasn't your typical wildfire, in the sense that it's not up in the foothills and these houses aren't surrounded by pine trees and whatnot. But you're taking those concepts and you're applying them to a more suburban environment that is on the plains here. And yeah, you shouldn't be planting next to your foundation, not only from a moisture perspective and that foundation interaction with moisture and continual wetting that's going to happen to that foundation when you're having to water shrubs that are too close to the foundation, but it's also a fire issue. So you're taking those concepts of creating this defensible space and you're overlaying it on a slightly different environment there.
So I know some people are considering using metal posts, metal rails with hardy board planks as the fencing coming up to their property. Any pros and cons with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my guess is that it's a pretty new technique. I don't think there's any issue with the metal rails and metal posts. I might, personally might question the long-term durability of hardy plank that's not supported correctly I know that, just in my own experience, I have some hardy plank as on my deck stairs. I don't know what you call that vertical
The
piece
riser.
between the
Riser.
riser, I guess, of the stairs, and over time it's degrading there, and so that could be an issue. But from a fire perspective, it's probably a good choice, but I don't know from a long-term durability perspective.
It's a good point.
I mean, obviously, a chain link fence would probably be one of the best ways to go, but it's not necessarily
Yeah.
the way many people would want to have. People would want to have around their house.
In our neighboring states, New Mexico and Arizona, it's quite different, the construction that's happening there, but they use block walls to separate the houses. And I don't know if that would fly here, but that would be a good solution.
Yeah, and it definitely that'll last a long time, and it provides a nice privacy between you and your neighbor.
So are there better materials for windows? It's basically the framing around the windows. Obviously, you don't want to use wood, but there's vinyl, there's fiberglass, there's other composites. Are there better materials for windows?
So I think there's two big drivers on windows. There's the glass, and then there's the seal on the windows of how much air can get sucked into the house. So the highest performing operable window is going to be casement windows, which are the crank type. Those get your best seal on the window, so you don't have as much there being able to get sucked into the house in general, and creating kind of any pressure differential. Those are great for long-term performance on a house as well. And then we come down to glass, and there's really two types of glass that gets put into residential windows. We have tempered glass and your typical plate glass, essentially. So tempered glass usually only gets put in areas like doors or directly adjacent to a door, or when you're really close to a floor, because when that gets hit, it has the coating on it that makes it shatter but not fall apart. And that's what's recommended the most as far as the outer layer of windows. If you have a double or triple glazed window, to have that built into the windows in a fire area, just because if it cracks, it doesn't create a big opening for embers to get sucked into the house. It still maintains a little bit of its structure and doesn't create large openings. So those are going to be your best bet on windows. I think there might be some other opinions here, but those are kind of the two big ticket items that I'm aware of.
John, what's your take in
Yeah.
regards to the window framing material?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that Travis said is correct. Tempered, a lot of the reports will say, and I don't know that I believe it, that tempered will last 4 times longer in a fire than a regular piece of glass. So from a glazing standpoint, that's certainly an option. They do have fiberglass, but it doesn't look great. I don't think you'd use that in a residential application. But it's interesting because, here we've talked about how we're going to close up this home, with a conditioned attic space, closed eaves, type of building materials. But at the end of the day, if the window is open during a fire, this whole thing is a moot point. So, but let's say that all your windows are closed. Certainly don't want to use a wood window, just like Travis said. There are window products out there that have a fire rating to it, and I don't know what those brands are offhand, but they do exist.
I'm guessing that they are by far more expensive than a typical double pane window.
Well, I mean, if you wanted to start going with an aluminum clad window, those are great windows for fire protection, but they have some downfalls. One is from an energy standpoint, they do, conduct a lot of, heat and cold. So that works against you. So you got to be careful about it. And they're a lot more expensive too.
Yeah, I know. This week here, just leading up to the holidays, here we're supposed to have, I think the low Wednesday night, the Thursday morning is like 15 below. So I'm guessing a metal window would not be a good thing to have.
So if you're in
No,
California, I shouldn't complain about 60 degrees today.
Yeah, you don't want a true metal frame window. And in fact, I don't think you could even get a metal framed window for in the residential sector that would meet the minimum U values that are required by the energy code there. But an aluminum clad window is different, that it would be, a wood frame window with a aluminum cladding on it that could, add some additional protection against embers and other things. But, the big thing about the window is that it's the tempered glass is designed to help resist the severe heat. So like if your neighbor's house is burning, it's going to resist breaking in totality, like Travis was saying, so that embers would be able to enter into that house there. So, any window, I think, would work from the perspective of trying to keep embers out of the house. But if that fire is close enough to the house, that's where the tempered windows become important.
And just kind of for reference, about how much more expensive is it to temper, say a percentage wise or whatever, a standard, say a plate glass to a tempered glass window?
I think there's a lot of factors in those numbers that are hard for especially architects to track on. It's kind of driven by the manufacturer, the type of glass they're using, and the total square footage. But typically a tempered glass window is going to be about twice the cost of a typical window.
Yeah. And if you are concerned about cost and also having a tempered window, always remember that the window is your weakest link in your building thermal envelope. So from a design perspective, I know it's difficult, but from a design perspective, limiting the windows in the envelope is a good thing. Taking the idea of window placement and trying to maximize in specific locations light and view and indoor outdoor experience, and maximizing it where it makes sense and minimizing it where it doesn't make sense. Making sure that you are looking at each opening and deciding, does it have to be an operable window? Can I have an inoperable window? Can I have a smaller window? That whole window to wall ratio, window to floor ratio is a big deal with regards to efficiency, and it will also reduce cost.
And okay, one of the last questions I have relates to like garage doors, especially people here. The wind was going 100+ miles an hour that day, howling from the west. If your garage faces the west, is there something that one should do, or just hope that nothing's going to happen?
I don't know if there's any great solutions for garage doors that you can buy that are more wind resistant. I'm sure you could find something that's being installed in Florida that's hurricane rated. But I think the biggest driver here is going to have to do with the construction of the house. So some of it's going to be smart locations of garages. You're already going to have a certain level of fire resistance between the garage and the conditioned space, habitable space of your home. So some of it might be minimizing combustibles that you store in your garage. So it's probably not a great place to keep a lot of flammables, accelerants, gas cans. That's something you probably want in a tough shed that's at the back corner of your backyard. or something along those lines. So with the idea that if something does blow into the garage, that it's not immediately able to catch on fire. So I think those are probably the biggest drivers there that I could think of. I'm sure there's some hurricane rated stuff out there to help with winds that might be smart though.
Travis, you bring up an interesting point. My garage, I had a gas tank in it. And it either got to the vaporization point or whatever, but then the garage exploded, literally exploded. And we had a brick veneer on the house that blew out to the street. I mean, everything else fell into the property. The bricks blew out as well as the garage door panels. So yes, you're right. I'm never storing propane in my garage, never gasoline, turpentine, acetone, whatever, again. It just was really quite remarkable how far it blew it out.
Well, I guess the other option is you can get flammable cabinets that are made for that they keep at wood shops, items like that already are metal and have an embodied rating. So that would be an area where it would be safer. Not foolproof with the temperatures that we had with the Marshall fire, but for a typical house fire or, you know, firework blowing into your garage or something like that.
And again, it's not necessarily a construction issue, but what's your take in regards to, I know certain areas it's code mandated to have fire sprinklers inside the home. Good idea, bad idea?
Well, I think fire sprinklers have been something in Colorado for the most part haven't been required in the majority of jurisdictions for single family residential homes or anything permitted underneath the International Residential Code. It's something that we anticipate probably will change in the next couple of years for a variety of reasons. Some of that being events like the Marshall Fire, as well as increased rates of long-term illnesses from firefighters, from fighting fires, and just because of the amount of contaminants in houses. So it is something we'll probably see, and it does make a difference. Now, fire sprinklers probably were not going to stop the extent of damage in the Marshall Fire due to the extent of where it got to heat-wise and the amount of houses that were put on fire, plus the high winds. But it's great for protection from your neighbor's house catching on fire in a simple house fire or something like that. And if they have a fire sprinkler system, it might not get to their exterior walls, or it gives the fire department enough time to get out there and put it out before it spreads to yours. So the incidental fires that can spread, it makes a big difference. And it makes a difference on attached housing where you just have 1 2-hour fire rated wall between each unit, those type of things. It really makes a substantial.
Well, you know, here in California, we've been using sprinklers in residential for
There's
quite
just
some time.
embodied home with it.
Go ahead, John.
Sorry about that, Travis. You cut off there. Sorry. In
Sorry.
California,
Yeah,
we've had we've been using sprinklers for a long time, but the sprinklers are really designed to, if there's a fire in your home, a kitchen fire, it helps with that. It allows the occupants to get out of the home safely during a fire. But I don't know that the sprinklers would have saved these homes like the fire you had. So Travis is certainly right in that respect.
One other question, I should have brought it up at the very onset. There are some people who are doing, Robbie, that are doing net zero homes, more or less thicker walls, basically you're net zero. Your energy consumption is equal to the energy generated by, say, solar panels and the like. From a fire resistant standpoint, what are that sort of construction? Is it better from a fire resistant standpoint?
Yeah, so there are kind of two things with regards to that. The first thing is they still are going to have the same choices as any other house that they're going to have to make with regards to the exterior cladding and roof materials and all the decking and everything else that we talked about. There's really no difference between that and any other house there. But kind of tying in the garage conversation that we had and whatnot, energy efficient houses and houses that are also focusing on indoor air quality and whatnot are inherently more resilient than other houses, because the air tightness of that house is going to keep a lot of embers out of that house. So these houses that burnt were primarily built in the 1980s and 1990s. They were not airtight houses. And when that wind came through, it created a positive pressure on the windward side and a negative pressure on the leeward side. It not only sucked in embers into the ventilated attic spaces, but it sucked in embers into the conditioned space of those houses, and houses burnt from the inside. So we do have some experience, in the Marshall Fire of a house that was retrofitted close to the passive house standards there, meaning that it was substantially airtight there. This homeowner's neighbors all were not able to move back into their house because of the severe smoke damage in their houses. The house that was retrofitted did not get the smoke damage because of its airtightness nature of the house. And so tight, well insulated, energy efficient houses are more resilient. But again, they don't necessarily, you still have to consciously choose the correct exterior cladding materials and whatnot to be, to take it to that true resilient, fire resilient nature.
All right, so I'm going to ask each of you, are there other things that people should be considering doing from above and beyond what we talked about today that would help make their home environment, yard environment better? So Travis, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I think we touched on a lot of good points here. Like we start off here, there's no materials that is 100%. And so, all we're just trying to do is minimize, fires spreading into the homes. And I think a lot of the things that we talked about are affordable. There are extreme measures you can take, but it's not appropriate for this region. They've got exterior sprinklers. Now, I don't see that being appropriate for this community. If you're in the woods and the mountains, and closer in the hills in Boulder, I think you do that. But here, you wouldn't do that. So there are other things if you want to go to the extremes.
So when you say exterior sprinklers, you're talking about like up on the roof?
Yes.
Itself?
They spread, they wash the house. So in a fire, they go off and they basically wash the house. They keep the house wet. And it's a measure you do in an extreme fire zones. Again, you would not do this probably in Louisville, but you would do it maybe if you're in the mountains.
Yeah, I'm guessing that with regards to cold temperatures, it probably might create a real challenge doing that.
I would imagine so.
All right.
Well, and I think sprinklers in general, it's more those incidental fires, because in the Marshall Fire, a lot of the houses lost water pressure because, and I've heard in Superior that from the fire over by the commercial areas by the Target, which was, upstream from some of the neighborhoods, it took all the water pressure. And so they weren't even able to access hydrants, and the sprinkler system probably wasn't even going to work at some of the neighborhoods. So I think that's probably also the biggest takeaway that anybody watching these videos should remember, is that there is a very unique nature to the Marshall Fire that is, incredibly uncommon. And it was such a heightened thing that a lot of what we're talking about are best practices with fires. But when the fire got to its raging highest, I'm not sure anything we've talked about was going to stop somebody that was in the direct line of basically a massive fireball. So what we've talked about is a lot of great best practices. there's a lot of embodied cost with when you upgrade all these materials. So homeowners kind of have to pick and choose. If I was going to say the easiest thing you can do is actively controlling your environment, which is taking into account the defensible space around your yard, keeping your gutters cleaned, working with your neighbors to ensure trees aren't growing too close to the house and that your planning and landscaping is appropriate. That's probably the easiest thing that you can control. And it's also something that you need to think about controlling together as a community. So it's not just you, it's about your neighbors down the street that help stop that chain reaction of events. So those would that would probably be the one thing I would hit the hardest on. You don't have to pay twice X for a building material just by putting in a little bit of your own elbow grease and working together with your neighbors.
Robbie?
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I think looking at some of these programs could be helpful for communities and individual homeowners. Again, the Insurance Institute's Wildfire Prepared Home Program, it's wildfireprepared.org, I think it has some great guidance, but it's all about choices and or maintenance. The big thing I guess we should just make sure everybody knows is that there are builders out there and other material manufacturers that are claiming maintenance-free housing, and the reality is that it's never maintenance-free, and especially with keeping leaves and other combustibles away from the house. So on a regular basis, cleaning the gutters and house designs that have that trap leaves and other things when the wind blows. You got to clean those places out if you want to really be prepared for these unfortunate events.
I'm a separate topic. I'm going to be curious to see if the houses that were not involved in the fire, but more or less in the fire area, if those houses are going to be removing trees that overhang their house and their shrubbery, again, taking that proactive approach of, okay, I need that defensible space. I'd be curious to see how many people end up doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a big question. I mean, and there's an expense there with a 40-year-old tree or 30-year-old tree that might need substantial pruning or to be removed. I think a lot of that's just by having this type of form of information so that everybody can work together as that, because everybody benefits as a whole when the whole neighborhood's protected. And yeah, I think there is that outlier. Are people going to completely redo their landscaping? I don't know. You would hope that maybe some neighbors could get together and think about it holistically about what the impacts are to them, to their whole community, and maybe pitch in or figure out ways to get creative with protecting the whole neighborhood.
And I would imagine if there's an association, that's another route. There could be some rules written to your association about how to maintain your yards and take some of those defensible measures.
Yeah,
Well,
like if there's a bunch of houses up next to an open space of wild grass and you look out your back deck window and all the grass is 2 feet high, 3 feet high, and not being maintained for 10 feet back from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably want to talk to the HOA and say, hey, somebody needs to know this.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to thank Robbie, John, and Travis for being here today. This video obviously is going to be at the Home Builders Association of Metro Denver. There will be over 20 presentations overall that people can watch on a wide variety of different topics. And so I welcome everybody doing that. At the same time, I welcome people looking at if you want to use a builder or other contractors, is to go to the Home Builders Association Metro Denver's website to be able to get more information about local, really good contractors to be able to help you. So with that, I want to say goodbye and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.